Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for the fourth Rebellious Truth lecture recital. I'm Dr. Laurie Watson and it's my pleasure to host today's event. The event today is being live streamed, so welcome everyone online as well. I'm glad you can join us. As well as that, we're recording today's event with the intention that the recording will go into the School of Scottish Studies archives. That doesn't mean that you have to be on your best behaviour. Please feel that you can relax. Just don't be shouting out any of your darkest secrets. Keep those to yourselves and we'll be fine. Rebellious Truth is a collaboration between Celtic and Scottish Studies at the University of Edinburgh and Edinburgh Trad Fest. In this series of talks with performance, we aim to foreground the perspective of the practitioner, and we invite them to connect their traditional art with a wider societal concern that's often reflected in their practice and or repertoire. This year we are joined by musician, songwriter, producer and broadcaster Archie Fisher, and his talk today is titled Once Upon a Song, 7 Decades of Scottish Folk. The themes that could be drawn from that include the passing of time, the nature of folk song, cultural revival, change and consistency, professionalisation of folk music and the connections between memory and music. But I think given the immensity of Archie's legacy and the unique opportunity to hear from someone whose perspective is informed by not just a long lens but a broad one too. In short, I think today's theme can just be Archie Fisher. We will begin with a music performance from Fraser Fifield, and then we'll move straight to the talk with Archie. There will be some songs and a short Q&A at the end. So there's no interval, but if you do need to leave the venue, feel free to do that just as quietly as you can. So our opening set today is from the University of Edinburgh traditional artist in residence, Fraser Fifield. Fraser is a multi-instrumentalist and composer, performing on low whistle, saxophone and bagpipes. He draws influence from many sources. Scottish folk music is present, but also jazz, Indian, Balkan and other musics. Since the mid-90s, otherwise known as yesterday, Fraser has worked with many artists in the Scottish folk scene, including Old Blind Dogs, Salsa Celtica, Capercaillie, Karen Matheson, and many more. And further afield, artists like Zakir Hussain, Afro-Celt Sound System, Balkanopolis, and Nordanians. In 2014, his low whistle featured on Montenegro's Eurovision song entry, followed in 2015 with an award from Hands Up for Trad for innovation in Scottish traditional music. And the 2020 Celtic Connections Festival opened with a fantastic concert from a 70-strong grit orchestra featuring one of Fraser's compositions called Secret Histories. So presenting a selection of tunes from his residency at the university. Please give a warm welcome to Fraser Fifield.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. And I'm looking forward to playing a selection of mostly traditional music for you this afternoon. I'm looking forward very much to hear Archie Fisher. It's lovely to see him again. I featured in his radio studio several times over the years, which was great, on Travelling Folk. I'm going to begin playing the low whistle, and in making up my set list I decided to improvise first of all. We'll see how wise a choice this was, but here we go. Improvise followed by a tune of my own called Sophia Rakia at the end of it. That's the type of drink they drink in Sofia. Thank you very much. I'd like to continue with a slow air from Ireland. It's quite well known. It's called Paddy's Rambles Through the Park. It's in mind because I tried to play it a couple of nights ago in a session in the pub and started at a note too high and got into big trouble. So I'm going to try again today here. very much. That was Paddy's Rambles Through the Park. Turning to the saxophone now, I'm going to attempt a couple of melodies that I suppose they're favourites. They've stuck with me over the years. Quite contrasting. I've never played them together before. They're from quite different traditions. The first is a polska from the village of Ora, I believe, which is on the border between Norway and Sweden. I learned this tune a long time ago from a recording of a Swedish band, I think, called Hoven Droven, kind of a folk heavy metal band. But some beautiful melodies in amongst the distorted guitars, etc. So that's Ora Polska, and coming closer to home for the second one is a Strasby called The Yow with a Crooked Horn. And I only found out relatively recently, I think it may well have been via the School of Scottish Studies archives, that the yow with the crooked horn being referred to as was a illicit still for making whiskey that had been stolen. So here we go. Thank you. So yes, I'm going to strap on the Scottish small pipes in A and proceed with a few jigs. I have a tendency to go for older tunes these days. Why, I don't know. I like them. So I'm going to play you a couple of those. Maybe because I'm getting old. We all are. The Snuff Wife and Centre's Bonnet, I think, are the two I'm going to play. The Snuff Wife is a popular tune around the sessions in Edinburgh, and for good reason. It's got a nice key change in it. And Centre's Bonnet comes from around the turn of the last century, around 1900. J.R. Centre, I think, was the centre being referred to, a piper of some repute. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thanks for listening. I'll play you one more short set on the pipes just now. Traditional format of march to Spain reel. The march, however, not the competition style. It's a beautiful old melody called the Bonnie Breast Knot. I'm not quite sure of the provenance of it, or what it's from. And the Strathspey reel, I don't know if they're related, but quite possibly, Maggie Cameron and Sandy Cameron, respectively. Favourite old tunes. Thanks for listening, and see you anon.
Thank you, Fraser. That was brilliant. I love the old tunes too. We've had so much enjoyment having Fraser as the traditional artist in residence at the university. It's been great to hear more about his early influences, his pipe lessons, and to bring him into some of the courses. And the students have so enjoyed hearing about his creative process and some of the background to Pibroch, for example, some of the forms that Fraser works with. So just brilliant. On to our 2024 Rebellious Truth speaker. It's a fairly sure bet most people in the room are familiar with Archie Fisher and his work, but you're going to get an introduction anyway. And for anyone new to it, then welcome. Musician, songwriter, producer and broadcaster, Archie Fisher is one of the most consistent champions and contributors to Scottish folk music. One of the Glasgow boys and girls of the late 1950s and 60s, leading what became understood as the Scottish folk song revival. His musical career began at home in the 1950s. The Fishers were a well-known singing family, including folk luminaries and Archie's sisters, Ray Fisher and Cilla Fisher. Ray and Archie were in a skiffle group together before they became a folk duo, and later a trio with Bobby Campbell called the Wayfarers. In the late 1970s, Archie began a long collaboration as an accompanist and record producer with Liam Clancy and Tommy Makem. As a songwriter, Archie's material has been covered by many well-known singers, including Barbara Dickson, Eva Cassidy, Wizz Jones and Stan Rogers. And in 1983, he began a 3-decade career as a radio broadcaster presenting BBC Scotland's Travelling Folk until 2010. In Once Upon a Song, Archie will look back at some of the changes in the folk scene over the past 70 years, and presenting these as a series of musical anecdotes. He'll bear witness to some of the events, people and songs that epitomised 20th century folk culture in Britain, Ireland and beyond, and reflect on folk song as a constant companion through generations of change. So please welcome Archie Fisher.
Very strange time of the day to start singing, but can I ask whoever's on the lights just to please dim them for me, please? I've just had cataracts done and I'm just totally blinded. Any chance? Otherwise I'll have to go and get my sunglasses. That's better. Thank you. All right. This is probably the first lecture I'll ever do in my life, and the last. Lectures are usually delivered by academics, which I assure you I am not. Although I was once accused of being an archivist. Back in the early days, I did 27 years presenting the BBC Radio Scotland Travelling Folk, and one of the earliest billings in the Radio Times said, Thursday, 8 p.m, Travelling Folk presented by Archie Fisher. So that's what I'm going to do this afternoon. I'm going to delve into my own archive and see what my obtrusive thought brings forward. I suppose the first time I became aware of the oral tradition, I was brought up with 6 sisters. I was a new age man by the time I was 4. There was a great repertoire. They had a great repertoire of street songs and game songs and circle songs and ball songs and skipping rope songs. And that was the first time I suddenly realized that there was an oral tradition that handed things down through the generations. And so eventually, there was also chants, things like, here she goes, there she goes, peery heels and pointy toes, look at her feet, she thinks she's neat, black stockings and dirty feet, which is probably an early form of Scottish rap. I'll keep away from that. But these little gems, who sometimes they came from very obscure sources, stayed with me for quite a long time. And I had to write a series of songs about generations for a radio documentary. And one of them kept recurring in my mind. There weren't always exclusively the girls that took part. There was one where the boys took part as well. What happened was the boys lined up in the playground, the girls lined up facing them, and they took 4 steps forward, 4 steps back, and they said, 3 kings came a-riding, 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 3 kings came a-riding, Y-O-U. And the girls said, what are you riding here for, here for, here for? What are you riding here for, Y-O-U? Did any of you ever sing that? No? We're riding here to marry, the boys marry, marry. We're riding here to marry, Y-O-U. Who you going to marry, marry, marry? Who you going to marry, Y-O-U? We'll marry Mary Margaret, Margaret, Margaret. We'll marry Mary Margaret, Y-O-U. That was the name of 3 generations of women who lost their husbands in 3 different wars. The first being the First World War, and then the Second World War, and the third being the long campaign in Malaya. Walking down the aisle with a sentimental smile for her lover born from Walking down the aisle with a sentimental smile for her lover bound for cruel Saint Julian. Loneliness and loss for a grave that has no cross, and the little girl is playing in the rain. She sang, water, water, wallflower growing up so high. We are all maidens and we must all die, except Mary Margaret, the youngest of them all. She can dance and she can sing and turn her back to the wall again. One more blushing bride with a young man by her side who has never heard of far El Alamein. One more baby girl with no father in her world, and they called her Mary Margaret once again. She sang, water, water, wallflower growing up so high. We are all maidens and we must all die, except Mary Margaret, the youngest of them all. She can dance and she can sing and turn her back to the wall again. Man Grandma cried as another soldier's bride saw her lover sail for far Malay shore. Add another name, kindling the poppy's flame from the ashes of the world's forgotten war, and sing, water, water, wallflower growing up so high. We are all maidens and we must all die, except Mary Margaret, the youngest of them all. She can dance and she can sing and turn her back to the wall again. Ring a roses, a graveyard full of posies, and sing along the circle song again. Make a witching wail from the crater of her shell till the 3 kings come a-riding o'er the plain, and sing, water, water, wallflower growing up so high. We are all maidens and we must all die, except Mary Margaret, the youngest of them all. She can dance and she can sing and turn her back to the wall again. Thank you. Well, becoming aware of the tradition was a strange thing. I had to, there was very little available, source of material available. I've discovered an old book, an Irish book about traditional music, and one of the quotes will stick with me for a long time. What it said was that the great tide of Irish traditional music had ebbed, but the children were still playing in the rock pools. And that's where all these street songs and things carried on through my life at that early stage. There were other influences, of course. My dad was a great singer. He was a tenor in the City of Glasgow Police Choir. He was a police inspector. His two favourite genres were light opera and music hall, which was quite a contrast. And his favourite song, his aria was La Donne Mobile, and the girls had a little parody they used to sing to them, because most tenors were of a kind of returned disposition. And they used to sing, La Donne Mobile, my legs are wobbly, no bloomin' wonder, look what they're under. And occasionally a scalp across the ear was called for. But he also had a scattering of traditional bits and pieces, fragments I think I'd call them. He had 3 verses of the long ballad, the Beggar Man ballad, to a tune I'd never heard from anybody else. The verses he had were, I'll bow my back and I'll bend my knee, and I'll put a black patch on my he, and then for a beggar they'll take me, and I'll wobble you all gang, laddie to my towery. Oh, lassie, you're far or young, you hinna got the twang o' the beggar and tongue. You hinna got the twang o' the beggar and tongue, and with me you canna gang, a lassie to my towery. If I was as black as I am white, but the snow that lies on yonder dike, I'll dress myself some beggar like, and I wobble you all gang, laddie to my towery. So if anybody else knows any of these verses from that tune, I'd love to hear them. And of course, I have no idea where he got that, but when he was a beat policeman in Glasgow, what they used to do, they'd take the helmet off and they'd go and they'd stand at the back of the music halls and just watch the show, especially on a cold winter's night. And back in these days, I'm sure there were bothy ballad singers involved in the variety theatre. And he probably picked that version up from one of them, because the first time I ever saw the McPeak family, you know, the Ulster singers that brought us Will You Go, Lassie Go, was in a variety theatre in Glasgow. They were there on the bill among the comedians and the dancing girls, and they were billed as a novelty act. And so it was possible back in the early days there were traditional singers and bothy ballad singers involved as novelty acts in the music hall. I never ever thought of myself as a novelty act, but there will come a time, I'm sure. So when I was 16, my mother had the foresight to give me a guitar for my birthday. It was an Egmont Frere plastic sort of looking thing. It was plywood, in fact. It was purple and had palm trees stenciled on it. And it was like playing a barbed wire fence is the nearest thing I can describe it to. But that was just at the beginning of the skiffle era, where everybody was picking up a guitar and imitating Lonnie Donegan. Well, the first time I heard Lonnie Donegan was actually when I was in the Merchant Navy. I ran away to sea when I was 15 just to have a romantic lifestyle. And I was in a little sort of cafe in New Jersey, and the jukebox was playing the Rock Island Line by Lonnie Donegan. And I thought this was wonderful. I just spent all the nickels I had playing it over and over and over. And then when I got home after that trip, I discovered he came from Glasgow, which was quite a surprise to me, which opened up all kinds of opportunities. But the other things, the other influences, I suppose, were very light radio ones. We could occasionally hear Burl Ives and occasionally the Weavers. And the Weavers had a song that was being played quite regularly on a Saturday night on Jack Jackson's music show, which was Kisses Sweeter Than Wine. And I thought to add this to the repertoire would be a good thing. So I went to the local record shop and I said, have you got a recording of Kisses Sweeter Than Wine? And they said, no, but Frankie Vaughan's going to release a single of it next week. And I thought, that's it, dead in the water for me then. I was not going to become a crooner by any means. But at that time, we were also invaded because of the trad jazz revival, which was running parallel to the beginning of the folk revival. by a lot of great American artists, especially blues players that the trad jazz producers would bring in. And there was one package tour, which I remember, there was Gary Davis, the blind Reverend Gary Davis, a black Negro minister. There was Buffy Sam Marie, First Nations American Indian. And there was Jack Elliott, who was living the legend of the cowboy. Although he was born in the Bronx, he had the cowboy hat and the boots and all the rest of it. And he, prior to the tour, had just sadly broken his leg. And they were flying up from London to Glasgow. And Hamish Imla and Josh McCrae were delegated to go and meet them at the airport. So they toddled down to the airport. And that was the days Glasgow Airport was a very tiny place. And the flight came in from London, no sign of them. So George said, I better go and find information and find out, what's happened here. And as he was walking away, he turned around and came back to Hamish and said, Hamish, you know what I've got to do? I've got to go and ask them, have you seen a blind Negro minister, a red Indian, and a cowboy with a broken leg? Alas. But they brought us another whole genre of music. And of course, the record companies hadn't really cottoned on to folk music by that time. And our two main sort of anchor men in the Glasgow, I was very biased to the West Coast in terms of the beginning of this lecture, were Norman Buchan. He was running a ballads class in his school in Rutherglen. And the other one was the poet Thurso Berwick, Maurice Blythman. And Maurice was more nationalist than Labour. And Norman, of course, was very Labour. And he recruited Ray and I, my sister and I, to sing at several Labour rallies. One was for the election of Judith Hart down in South Ayrshire way back. And the rally was held in the local football field. And we were sitting in the football field with a microphone. The audience were in the stand. And there was donkey rides between us and the audience. But we managed to get through a repertoire. So we felt a bit exploited in some ways, but at least we were learning about sort of society and politics. And we weren't really protest singers, not for a wee while anyway, until things like the protests sealed up the River Clyde and the CND movement kicked in. So the other influences that we were bombarded with in a way, because television suddenly caught on to it. But Robin and Jimmy on the Tonight programme on BBC every evening, singing a couple of songs. And STV decided they would like to do the same thing. So they got Ray and I to do a Thursday night slot. And it was a very difficult thing because Ray was living in Newcastle and I was in Glasgow. And we were rehearsing on the telephone most of the time. And when we got there, we weren't ever so sure of the repertoire we were going to sing. So Ray was actually lip reading me most of the time when I was singing. And the next verse, and she had developed a sort of rubato a wee bit behind the beat because she was actually waiting for me to cue her in. And that affected my romantic life for quite a while because people saying, what about that wee wife of yours with the glasses that keeps gazing at you? Little did they know. Well, after Ray decided to move back down to Geordie land, she married Geordie Piper, Colin Ross. I was left with a repertoire of about 30, 40 songs, but they were all just harmonies and choruses. And I had to start all over again in a way. But luckily, during that time, the great traditional Scottish singers were still on the go. They were still performing, and they were still very much a dynamic entity on the folk scene. My favourite actually was an old character called Davy Stewart. He was known affectionately by his clan Stewarts as the Old Galoot, because he was quite a character. And he played the most, I think the best way to describe it is a very raucous accordion. And I was walking up Union Street in Aberdeen once, he was a busker too. And through the noise of the traffic came the sound of this raucous accordion. It was like 3 ambulances going in different directions. And I looked across, and there was Davy sitting on a milk crate on the far side of the pavement with his box out, busking away. So I waved my way through the traffic and went to say hi. And sitting on the pavement beside him was a lovely houndstooth tweed cap. And I said, that's a very posh cap, Davy, to have lying on the street. He said, £18. He said, you paid £18 for that? He said, no, it holds £18, he said. And I hope this was before decimalisation, so I hope he got it. But he had some lovely songs which I borrowed from him. This is my favourite. As I come in by Huntly Toon, be a morning for to feed, Appleton with Bogie O'Kearney, and with him my dear to Cohesh row past horses, or Kert, or Harry, or Plough, or the Jonathan about farm work, I very well could true. Now Bogie had a daughter, and her name was Isabel. She was the flower o' the valley, aye the primrose o' the dell. And when she gaed out walking, she chose me for her guide down by the burn o' Kearney to watch small fishes collide. When the first 3 months were past and out, this lassie lost her bloom, and the red fell frae her rosy cheeks, and her eyes began to swoon. And when 9 long months were passing gane, she brought forth to me a son, and I was quickly called for to see what could be done. And I said that I would marry her, but no, that wouldn't do, for you're no a match for my bonny belle, and she's no match for you. Well, no, she's married to a tinkler chiel that bides in Huntly Toon. He mends pots and pans and paraffin lamps, and he scours the cans. Aye, and maybe she's got a better lad, old Bogie can't tell. But I'll ne'er forget the tender kiss of Bogie's bonny bell. Lovely old Davy Stewart. As well as the influences from the great Scottish traditional singers that were on the go at the time, there were some great American artists were brought over by the trad jazz promoters, and a lot of them were mainly in the blues style. So we picked up a lot of blues playing in that kind of guitar style as well as cowboy songs from people like Jackie Elliott. So we were a sort of mixture of hybrid Americana, a lot of what was happening. But at this time, the clubs were expanding, and the search for repertoire became imperative in a way. And the record companies had started to pick up on the fact that people wanted to listen to this music. And a few of us got recording contracts, and we started off mainly with Topic and then the Transatlantic label. But it was always going to be a search for new songs. And people stole songs from each other without any fear whatsoever of being sued. And nobody really started writing songs there until the great radio ballads with Ewan MacColl and Peggy Seeger started up. And that started to feed contemporary songs into the folk revival. And my first influence in songwriting came to actually be patching up songs, bits of songs that I knew that needed a few more verses here and there. And I got a job with BBC, or a sort of occasional job with BBC Schools Broadcasting, writing a song based on a theme for whatever the broadcast was going to be that week. And one of the producers, who wasn't quite au fait with the folk scene, said, we're doing a programme next week on lighthouse keepers. Could you give us, write me a sort of lighthouse chorus song? I thought, there must have been very loud singers if they were singing in choruses from lighthouses. But that was one of the briefs. So it became a kind of song hack for a while. And that was good because it gave me a sort of apprenticeship in trying to put words together, and became very interested at the same time in early Scottish poetry. And of course, the bard was of great influence to all of us, and we borrowed his materials at the first drop of a hat. But still, the American collectors came over as well to kind of enhance us. Hamish Henderson, of course, was the anchorman in Edinburgh, and he had a nationwide influence all over the place. And he invited quite often American folklorists, like Ken Goldstein was one, and the great Alan Lomax came over once. And Norman Buchan's wife Janie told me a story about Alan. He'd been up and he'd never heard of the walking songs, the Tweed walking songs that the women used to sing. And he found this really, he said they were very like First Nations American music, this sort of rhythmic throbbing and banging. And so he had recorded some of this, and he was coming down to Glasgow to do a live radio program. And he brought these tapes of the walking songs, and he said, I want them played because I'm going to talk about them. So they gave it to the engineer, and the show was going out live. And Janie was listening to it with a Gaelic friend. And of course, the women started to sing. There was a lot of traditional verses for the walking. But then after a while, when they ran out of the traditional verses, they started to improvise. And they were working away through the traditional verses, and when they started to improvise, they started to discuss the sexual potential of the big American with the beard, which was Alan Lomax. So frantically phoned the BBC and said, take that off. But alas, it was too late. And I think there was a few complaints from the wee Freeze, but that was about it. I suppose that songwriting thing that stayed with me for a long time was influenced mainly by American songwriting. It was very difficult to write a Scottish song. And back in these days, I was looking at an old guitar I had recently, and an old Gibson guitar. And these days, we used to write a repertoire and stick it on sellotape on the top of the guitar. And I looked at the list of songs that were on this old Gibson, and some of them would not be called politically correct nowadays. There were songs about whaling, songs about fox hunting, and occasionally songs about mining, and that's not getting very politically correct either. And the reason I stopped sticking this label on my guitar was I was doing a concert in Glasgow with Cisco Houston, a great American buddy of Woody Guthrie. And I stuck my list on. I remember the first song, and I started singing it, looked down, no list. I stuck it on the wrong side. It was there. So I turned the guitar over, and it was upside down. So there wasn't much help with it. And there was another occasion it's funny how songs that have come out of nowhere. I live in the Galawater Valley, and I was sitting on the veranda outside. Look at me, I was brought up in a Glasgow tenement, and now I've got a veranda. Looking over the Galawaters. There's a stand of trees in the autumn there, and there's an iconic picture of Woody Guthrie with a cigarette dangling from his lips and a guitar that says, "This machine kills fascists." And this sort of image appeared in the trees. You know how sometimes if you're sort of looking through half-shut eyes, these images can occur. The Shetlanders have a lovely word for it. They call it glindering. Well, there was me glindering with a glass of single malt across the Galawater. And this came to mind. It was late in November. I think this might be too low. Maybe not. It was late in November as the last leaves were turning. I saw Woody's face in the trees. He seemed for a moment to be smoking and smiling as the curve of a bough gently swayed on the breeze. And I can't say that I've done a lot of hard traveling. It's been easy for most of the way. But I can't say I'm glad that I walked a while with him, listening to all he'd just singing to say. We were sons of the city, Josh, Shune and Hamish, and the music had given us a voice. And we all played guitar while young Bobby played fiddle, and I sang with my sisters, Ray, Cindy and Joyce. From the green border hills to the grey Grampian mountains, we travelled in search of the song. And Willie and Jeannie were the wellspring and fountains of the ballads that told us just where we belong. And it was back in the 60s, in the Grand Hall in Glasgow, a 12-string rang out from these bells, and a long lanky figure with a voice like a foghorn tuned up and played us the banjo from hell. And we knew in the moment that we heard Pete Seeger, the song that just music can rhyme, but the gift from a people who've suffered and struggled and sang of their lives through the good and hard times. Many years have gone by since we first heard the song, and the music has flourished and thrived. And the young ones out there aren't doing much wrong, and the old ones like me are just glad we've survived. So let's raise a glass to those gone before us, to the great sandy bells in the sky. And when we meet again, we will join in the chorus, the great broken circle in the sweet by and by. They often say that music can be a healer, and last year I went over to the Fiddler's Green Festival in Rostrevor, and Tommy Sands, who's been a great advocate of peace in the north of Ireland, a great healer with his songs and his music, told me a story. Every year they present a Creative Arts Award, and in 2008 it was to Pete Seeger. And he knew that Jerry Adams, the head of Sinn Féin, was a great Pete Seeger fan, so he asked Jerry Adams if he'd present it at this healing concert held on a Sunday afternoon. And for balance, he thought he'd better invite somebody from the DUP, so he invited Jeffrey Donaldson. And they both came to the concert, and they made it very clear that they weren't going to shake hands. Donaldson said that 2 of his friends had been killed by Provo IRA. And in fact, Jerry Adams still has 2 bullets that the Nationalists put in. And so they definitely were not going to shake hands. But Pete, of course, couldn't make it because he was getting quite old then. And his grandson, Theo, came over to sing, and he was also a folk singer. And the song he chose to sing was Where Have All the Flowers Gone, an anti-war song. And there's a couple of taglines in this you can join in on if you feel like it. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the flowers gone? Lassies pick them, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever run? Where have all the lassies gone? Long time passing. Where have all the lassies gone? Long time ago. Where have all the lassies gone? Gone to young men, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Where have all the young men gone? Long time passing. Where have all the young men gone? Long time ago. Where have all the young men gone? Gone to soldiers, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the soldiers gone? Gone to graveyards, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Tommy told me he was sitting between these two political leaders, and he noticed the strange reaction coming from the audience. He said a lot of people were looking very moved, and somebody even crying. And then he realized that these two men that wouldn't shake hands were both singing along with the song. So maybe there is a healing in some of the music. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the flowers gone? The girls have picked them, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? There you go. Well, I was asked, are there any questions coming from the audience? Because that's me out of my archive. Any questions that anybody would like to ask me directly? No? Well, one of the things that I'm going to get some questions from the doc.
That's great. We've got a few questions in the audience, Archie, if you're up for taking them.
Yeah, come over.
Great, love a surprise. Unfortunately, we don't have a roaming microphone, but maybe we can pass the question down. Do you want to? Yeah, let's start here in the.
I'd like to know how old you are.
Mute the live stream. She asks how old you are. You're no obligation
is there
to
an
answer.
auctioneer in the room? Start the bidding at 64. In advance of 64? 66? I'll be 85 this year.
Nice. Suitably impressed.
Actually, that's my shoe size, 8.5 as well.
Did anyone else have their hand up there? Yes, 3 rows from the back. I can see you.
Did you know that on Bandcamp there is a 4-track EP from 1964 for yourself and Ray?
There's a 4-track EP on Bandcamp of yourself and Ray from 1964. Far O'er the Fourth is on Bandcamp.
An EP? Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, that's right. It's got the Twa Corbies and a few other songs on it. Yep. It's a collector's item. A garbage, sorry, not a garbage collector's item. Yes, it was deleted. I think it's actually been reissued as part of an LP compilation as well. Yep. That was I think that was the very first time we ever went to a recording studio. And Ray, of course, was the lead singer. And I once toured with Ray and his younger sister, Cilla, in America. And that was a real lesson to learn. You know, in soccer, they have strikers and sweepers. They were the strikers, I was the sweeper at the back. And so I was actually quite submissive in terms of vocalizing for a long time. I just sang harmonies and didn't have the courage to stand up and sing solo until I realized that single malt could really help a great deal.
Great. Any others? I'll give you a moment. I've got a couple of questions here, so I'll come back. I wanted to ask about the very fast pace of change, kind of 1950s, 60s, 70s. There was a lot of professionalisation, happened very quickly. mainstream media opportunities for musicians engaging with folk music. What difference did that make, do you think, to the music and the lives of the musicians at that time?
Well, we didn't really think saying that you wanted to be a folk singer when you grew up wasn't really feasible in these days. Until, a lot of the exposure that came from television, especially from some of the more famous, Paul Simon came and did the Scottish folk circuit one time when he was a young sort of emerging songwriter. In fact, he played at the St Andrews Club, and the record show he was paid all of £12. And he was asked by the organiser what was next, and he said, I just met up with this guy called Art Garfunkel. His guitar playing is rubbish, but he's quite a good singer. So we're going to see what happens with that. And of course, that became history. And that there was a few other people, like Bob Dylan. He never came to Scotland, as far as I know. But he visited lots of the folk scenes in England and sort of encouraged and borrowed, unashamedly, in terms of melodies, as did Paul Simon. And the fact that these people were in such a high position of, people, they were very talented, of course, that's why, that a lot of younger musicians like myself aspired to be in that same kind of club. So we worked very hard at that, and the main thing was to try and become, what the media wanted was 3 minutes long, up-tempo. It doesn't matter what you were doing, whether it was a hootenanny club, whether it was the STV's magazine programmes. And so that became a sort of cliche in a way. And Robin Hall and Jimmy McGregor were the masters of the 3 minutes up-tempo songs. So we took some of them as our models in a way. And then, of course, when the great balladeers came onto the folk scene, they were there, we used to share the bill with people like Jeannie Robertson and Willie Scott. And we suddenly realised that, there was much more depth to what we were supposed to be doing. We weren't just skating along the surface of it. And when people started to have the cheek to pay us, my goodness, that was amazing. And we thought we've got to really earn this, so we've got to do something that's going to be constructive and informative, and not just academically instructive, but entertaining at the same time. And so there was a branch of whatever we did became entertainment too, and I think that that produced people like Billy Connolly and Hamish Imla and people like that, who became more famous probably as comedians than they were as singers. So that was one of the main influences that happened at that time.
Thanks, Archie. There was a question over here, I think. Was there? Yeah, on you go.
I read a long time ago, and I thought it was true, that when he was a young man washing dishes in a cafe in the High Street, you taught Bert Jansch to play the guitar.
Did you teach Bert Jansch to play the guitar when he was washing dishes in the High Street?
Well, I didn't touch much on the Edinburgh scene because I'll leave that to a lot of people who know a lot more about it than I do. But when the house started up in 369 High Street, we decided Roy Guest was the main sort of force behind that, and we decided to run some guitar lessons, and Roy's wife, Jill, was doing the beginners, and I was asked to do the advanced. And this kid turned up with a Spanish guitar, a nano-strung guitar, to do the beginners. And after 20 minutes, Jill led him in and said, he knows all I know, he's over to you. And that was Bert Jansch. And Bert was a sort of, I don't know, he was a sponge. If he saw somebody playing something, it just went straight in and straight to his fingers. He could just, imitate or copy anybody he wanted or learn from other people. And then, of course, he added his own individuality to it. So nobody taught Bert Jansch to play the guitar except himself, but he watched everybody else playing and learned from that. That's the best way to describe what happened with Bert.
Over here.
I would be interested to hear you talk a bit more about the relationship between traditional songs and written songs. Like obviously you've written so many amazing songs, and we've seen the transition between kind of mostly from the traditional songs and lots
That's a good one.
You're a great songwriter, Archie, and we're being asked, what do you think the relationship is between the older songs, the traditional ballads, and then this great body of new songs that came out in the 20th century?
As I mentioned earlier, I think that the radio ballads injected a great quantity of very high quality material from Peggy Seeger and Ewan MacColl. That showed that there was a possibility to assimilate the tradition into new songwriting, as long as you stuck to certain rules. But they weren't very strict rules, but they just had to have that essence of you know, for example, Tom Paxson told me once that quite often he claims to have written several songs that are now regarded as being traditional, because you managed to catch that certain essence that a traditional song has. And that's one thing that, you know, that's a difficult thing to teach. I think you've got to just feel it. And in a way, you know, it's down to, a lot of it is down to vocabulary, that there are certain words you would never use in a traditional, you never find in a traditional song, and they wouldn't fit into a song that was meant to be an assimilation of a tradition. And quite often when I've written a song, I'll go over it and go, oh, no, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. And it's mainly because of vocabulary. You've got to either simplify it or leave room in the song for imagination, not just sort of explicitly fill every detail, but leave room for the listener to fill in as well.
That's great. We had a songwriting workshop in here today, and I wonder if that came up. It was great advice. Yeah, on you go.
You mentioned the St Andrew's Folk Club. I went there when I was still at school, and I'm just wondering what memories you have of the Sunday nights with Pete Shepherd and other people. Any good memories or?
Somebody that went to St Andrew's Folk Club, and they're asking what your memories are of the folk club and Pete Shepherd.
I remember I interviewed somebody on Travelling Folk, a singer, and she said that she used to come to St Andrew's Folk Club and sit at the back and do her homework. And then she said, oh, I wasn't at school, I was actually correcting my homework for the kids in the primary school. St Andrews, well, the two main sort of clubs that sort of kicked off in Fife were Kirkcaldy and St Andrews. And St Andrews, of course, was run by a body of students from the university there. And Pete Shepherd, who's still well on the go at the moment. And there was a certain enthusiasm about that club, because I sang a traditional song once there that got the biggest laugh I think I've ever had in a traditional song. It started off, I've travelled east and I've travelled west, and I have been to Kirkcaldy, and the place just fell apart. They literally thought this was hilarious. They thought this was going to be a funny song. But it was, the song was the Collier Laddie, a sort of minor song. So they had a certain zest, and it was always a very lively night. And lots of these songs, Andy, who recorded most of them on quite a high quality tape recorder, has put a lot of them on YouTube. So you can revisit the St Andrews Club from 20 or 30 different broadcasts. I think he's got one or two of mine on there, and I haven't got the courage to listen back to them, but I will someday.
I keep taking notes. I've got so much homework to do after this gig. Any other questions? Yeah, on you go. This guitar or the first? Who made your guitar?
Well, this is one of my older guitars. I've got, it's made by Roger Bucknell of Fylde Guitars, which used to be in the Fylde Peninsula near Blackpool, but he's now moved to Penrith. And I think I've got 3 at the moment. The very first one is kind of retired. This is my sort of second one. And the last one I got, he made especially for my 70th birthday. And he said, this one will see you out. He said, so I was tempted to order another one just to be on the safe side. So he makes very beautiful instruments, a very dedicated luthier. And in fact, this is a think this one's about 1981. And I brought it out because I thought she was getting feeling a bit lonely, just not being in that guitar case all these years and not being on the road. And she sounded lovely. She's really great.
I think we all agree. I grew up in a house of filed guitars, and they're beautiful instruments. Yeah. Any others before we wrap up? Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, on you go.
Earlier you talked about it being difficult to write a Scottish song when you were starting out. And you're talking about the influence of American blues and jazz. Do you feel like it's gotten easier since then to write what you call a Scottish song?
So you mentioned earlier that there are challenges, or there were when you started to write folk songs, and the conventions or rules that were in place, and then also the influence of American music and blues. Has it gotten easier to write a Scottish folk song?
That brings a song to mind, actually. The first real sort of Scottish folk singer-songwriter that I came across was, of course, Stuart McGregor, who was a poet, an Edinburgh poet and songwriter. I met up with him once in Sandy Bells, and he told me he was going up to work on the hydroelectric dams that were being built at that time as a paramedic. And I couldn't figure out why, and then he pointed out they were all going to be built very close to single malt whisky distilleries, so that made a lot of sense too. And he admitted he was sometimes more para than medic, but that was... And his poetry translated beautifully into song as well. And that was again because of vocabulary, because the poems actually sang in a way that, you know, they didn't have corners on them, they didn't fit into music. Is the best way to describe it. The west winds blow to Cosheville, with the winds came we. And where the river hugs the wood, and blackthorns bloom, and may there stood a single rowan tree. So young and tender, so were you. I loved you both as there you grew. The day I took the road that leads by Rannoch to the sea. And we carved our names in Cosheville. The rowan leaves were still, but the darkening west was in your eyes. Despite your kisses and my lies, my thoughts had crossed the hill. I broke your heart as the minutes passed, for I shrugged and said that nothing lasts. Many is the backward glance I cast as I went north to the drill. And the big wheels rumble up and down, the lorries know the way. I waved my hand and I hitched a ride across the bridge at Rannoch side, where the diesel motors play. Then I set myself to a cliff of stone, where each of the bowing hammers drone. And the aching side I rode alone, for you were far away. But the money moved from Eric's Loch, the great glen beckoned on. At Norriston the hills grew pale, we fought and drank through old Kintail, till our money soon was gone. Then I cursed Loch Offside's autumn rain, in the winter whiskey, in Dunblane, till the west winds rose in the spring again, and my heart leapt at its song. And I came at night to Cosheville, with a dozen hills aflame. You had another hand to hold, beneath the names we carved of old, there was another name. You looked me through, you paid no sign. I drank the cup of bitter wine. Well, I knew the fault was mine, and I went the road I came. Stuart McGregor. Actually, I sang that at the Ross Trevor Festival about 9-10 years ago, and Tom Paxton was on the bill as well, and he said he'd really like to record it. So I sent him the words, and I'm looking forward to his American pronunciation of all these Scottish place names. He hasn't done it yet. He was in really great form. In fact, he sang a parody of one of his own songs. So see if I can paraphrase it, if you forgive the American accent. I met a young girl in a folk club, as you do. You do. And we quickly adjourned to a close pub for a brew, just we two. She invited me back to her single-room flat, and her whole disposition was kind. Then she played me every album Tom Paxton ever made, and you know that was the last thing on my mind. So nothing is sacred.
Brilliant. Well, we'll wrap up, if that's okay, with one last question from me.
You.
Is that okay?
Thank you all.
So a last question about 20th century folk song revival. The folk song became and was used as a vehicle for all kinds of civic change, for protest, for cultural change. Are there any messages you think from that time that are relevant today and that you feel could do with a bit more attention today?
I had a discussion not that long ago with Vic Gaughan, where have all the protest songs gone? And he said, he didn't say, and I agree, it's not because of apathy, it's actually because there are more platforms now for protest. And, singing at one time wasn't the main platform for protest, as Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and other people proved. But now there's all kinds of things on the internet and Facebook and all the rest of it that you can make your point. And sometimes, people are aware of problems and they're probably doing something about it. And the last thing they need is to have something else rammed down their throat that they're already doing. And I think, and I agree with him, he thinks that's one of the reasons that, if you like, the protest song has waned, because you're declaring the obvious most of the time. Everybody knows certain things are wrong, and everybody knows certain regimes are wrong, and everybody knows certain behaviours are wrong, and certain environmental things are wrong. So you don't need to actually reinforce it in song. Don't waste your time doing that, just sing something lyrical and cheer people up.
Music for healing. Yeah. Well, a final huge thank you to Archie Fisher, everybody, before I run through the other thanks for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We're really very privileged to have had you with us today to share your songs and your stories. So thank you to you all for joining us, both in the Traverse and everybody at home as well. There is a survey to grab on your way out. It's multiple choice. You just select your section and rip the card. It's modern technology. A big thank you to Dave and all the staff at the Traverse Theatre, to Craig Gaskin on sound, to Sandy Butler on the live stream and the film. Thank you very much, team. Thanks to Edinburgh Tradfest and their sponsor, the William Grant Foundation, to Jane Ann Purdy and Douglas Robertson, absolute heroes. Thank you to Celtic and Scottish Studies and the School of Scottish Studies Archives at the University of Edinburgh. A huge thank you to our musician at the beginning of the afternoon, Fraser Fifield, for his beautiful music. Thank you, Fraser. And extra special thanks to our 2024 Rebellious Truth speaker and musician, Archie Fisher.
Thank you.
All the best. Safe home, everybody.